Hello, Paul Sabo, Christian Evangelist with GospelProof.com. The video you're about to watch is part of a playlist called Spiritual Warfare. If you haven't been following the channel, I strongly suggest going to my playlist, and it should be towards the top, called Spiritual Warfare, and starting with part 1. It makes more sense if you start with part 1 and go through the videos. But that's up to you. If there's something that caught your eye that you want to check out, then continue watching the video. But either way, on with the show. Hello, Paul Sabo, Christian Evangelist and creator of GospelProof.com. Thanks for tuning into the channel. Today we're going to work on part 3 of our playlist called Spiritual Warfare. We left off with part 2. We had talked about how Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden had sinned and gained the knowledge of good and evil. And with that, they passed on the knowledge of good and evil to future generations, which in that everyone has sinned. As it says in Romans chapter 5, verse 12, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. We also learned some things about Satan and the fallen angels, things that we're going to need to know with future videos with our spiritual warfare playlist. We learned about Satan. Let's see how after he sinned, he took a third of the angels with him. They're called the fallen angels. And we learned how they can Satan and the angels can, it's called ship shape. They can take on any shape. They can 1 minute be looking like your passed away last year, your grandmother who passed away last year. And then in a moment's time, they can look like a UFO flying by. We learned that Satan is God's most powerful creation. He is God's wisest creation, and also God's best looking creation. Although with those, he also is God's proudest creation, and that's what made him sin, and that's what makes him evil, is his pride. With that, all his wisdom, that just made him a really good liar and a really good killer. We learned that Satan is jealous of God and that he wants to be like God. We also learned that we can be inspired by Satan. Now, when I say inspired, it's kind of like how God inspired the King James. The scriptures are inspired by God. It's almost as if Satan can whisper thoughts into your ear, you know. Now, he's not as powerful as God. Now, God can actually change what happens on command. Satan, he can tempt you. Now, he's got some strong temptations, as you know, but he isn't as powerful as God as far as changing time, but he can whisper thoughts in your ear that are very encouraging. He also isn't like God, as God is not under time. Satan can only be in one place at a time, unlike God. For we looked, as it says in Isaiah chapter 46, verse 10, God wrote that he is declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done. So, see, God's outside of time. He can, I don't know, it's something that's hard for us to relate to with our minds because it's so above us, but that's what the book says, and that's just the way it is. So, moving on. Now, in part 3, we're going to talk about the next period. Now, after Adam and Eve, as you know, the world populated more, and we're going to look at, it's called the PreFlood Dispensation, which actually we're going to talk about, the area up until and including the flood. Now, this was the only time ever that there was no laws. This is before God made any laws with the Jewish, nation. Before all that, he did make the one rule not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but that was inside of the garden. And as you know, after Adam and Eve sinned, they were thrown out of the garden. So that really didn't have anything to do with anything at this point. So up until the flood, that's one time period that you can kind of look at and kind of contest what things would be like when there aren't any rules. For there weren't any rules in that time. Now, as you know, as humans, we had the knowledge of good and evil. But what we learned to help us against that, what God gave us, kind of God fighting back, is we had a conscience. Now, our conscience gives us feelings like guilt and stuff. It's basically a common knowledge of right and wrong. And with the knowledge of good and evil, hopefully our conscience will steer us away from doing wrong. Although during this time period, we get a chance to see how our conscience, which is human power, can stand up to the temptations of Satan with his power. And we're going to learn that it didn't do very well. Paul talked about this conscience in the book of Romans. I want to go over a couple verses with you. We're going to take a look at Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. It says, "For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which shown the works of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also hearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another." So basically, in other words, what it means is that even without laws, it was possible to sin, because if you were to do something that your conscience told you you shouldn't be doing, then that would be unlike how God would have done things, and that would be considered a sin as well. So if there were somebody, let's say even today's world, who grew up on an island and never had a law, never anything, never heard about God, never anything, he still has his conscience. And with his conscience, he is able to sin and be in deservance of going to hell. That's just another point on that. Now, as we learned when we received the Holy Spirit during the baptism, spiritual baptism that happens once we're reborn, how God puts the laws on our heart. Now, that's different than this. This is only human strength within ourselves. When you receive the Holy Spirit and the laws are put on your heart, that's different, because you receive actual part of God, for God is the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And God cannot be around sin. So that's completely different. When you receive God in your heart with the laws on your heart after being reborn, it's like your conscience times 1,000. I mean, sins should make you, if you're truly reborn and you have God on your heart with the laws on your heart, then to do wrong will just, it's like your conscience. It acts like your conscience, but it's, like I said, times 1,000. It's the power of God rather than human strength. So now, as we said, we took the power of our human strength with the conscience and we put it against the temptations of Satan for this time period up until the flood. And it didn't do very well. Because, for instance, Satan, he's whispering in your ears, you deserve more respect than that, making people fight, and you worked all day, you deserve a drink, and people making him steal, you deserve that. He doesn't deserve that. You deserve it more than him. And all these thoughts that Satan inspires and he whispers in your ear with his temptations, it just didn't stand up to our conscience. And to see what happened with this, we're going to take a look at Genesis 6, verse 5. It says, "And God saw that wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So in other words, the time of the flood, without laws, with Satan just all his temptations towards everyone, it was like, no, not a fighting chance. It became nothing but 100%, well, actually 99% pure evil. Noah was the only one, and his family was the only one. That's why God saved him, and Noah lasted through the flood. But it was so bad that God actually regretted making man. It says, as you continue in Genesis 6:6, it says, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him in his heart. So God flooded the earth. He killed everybody but Noah's family. And from this was another war that Satan pretty much won, because due to his temptations, him and the fallen angels managed to get almost everyone killed, all except for Noah and his family. Now, what we learn from this dispensation is that we can't do it alone. We need the Holy Spirit. To be alone with the human body up against the temptations of Satan, it isn't going to work. It showed that during this time period. And it was almost like it was a test that God was doing or something to see how it happened, but it didn't go well. We're going to continue from this point in our next video. In the next video, we're going to talk about how after the world repopulates from Noah, God starts working towards having a second Adam. The world repopulates, and he separates into nations, and then he starts a special nation, which will be the bloodline of Jesus. And we're going to take a look from here on how Satan fights this process and what happens with Satan. It's going to start getting good here. The next video we're going to have fun with. But I just wanted to talk about this era before the flood, because it's kind of important just to show you how Satan got everyone killed once, and to let people know about how our conscience and how that works, and how it alone will not stand up to Satan's temptations, because everyone died. So stick with the playlist. We're going to start getting into the good stuff next week. Next week we're going to talk about some false gods. So that's going to start getting interesting. But I wanted to set these things up. The first few starters, like I said, it's kind of like a book. You got to set your foundation. But we pretty much got a foundation of all the basics on everything with Satan and the spiritual warfare. So now we're going to start getting into the good stuff, which is going to start with false gods with the next video. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And hopefully you'll stick with this playlist. Like I said, it is going to get good. But make sure you hit that subscription button. That way you can get notification of the newer videos when they come out. Again, I'm sorry that my videos haven't been every week like I've been wanting to do. I've just been busy with summertime, and I'm going to get back on a good schedule here soon. I know I keep saying it, but I'm really working on it. I'm trying. But thanks for your patience. And